Hello, welcome to Philosophy All Along. Glad to have you here. So, I want to talk with you today about War of the Rohirrim because there's something that I think it does very, very, very well. Now, the film overall is a good film. I enjoyed it. I'm very comfortable with it kind of adding to the lexicon of Lord of the Rings experience, which I generally pretty much love all of it. And, the wider and broader that world can be, the better it is for me. And, the animation is beautiful. The voice acting is very good. The plot, on occasion, surprised me, which is always nice, right? For it not to be too predictable. Certainly there are some predictable moments for sure. There's some fulfilling cameos that are light and reasonable. And there's also kind of a couple of secret cameos. Oh, which reminds me, there will be spoilers here in this conversation today. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to watch it first. But for example, the actors who play Merry and Pippin in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, they voice not Merry and Pippin, they voice some other characters. And I wouldn't have known had I not looked it up. So anyways, it's a fun film. It's good and it's beautiful. And it's always nice to spend more time in Middle Earth. So what I wanted to talk with you about is the thing that I think it does particularly well. Like there's always things that can be criticized and things that aren't perfect about any film, but I like to look at the things that it does really well. And I think something that this film does very, very, very well with a deft hand is address issues of feminism, right? And it seems like, well, that's kind of obvious and heavy-handed, but I really don't think that it is. One, the director purposely was trying to avoid a kind of overused princess warrior trope, and that comes across. The reason why I like that, as much as I think it's awesome to have princess warriors, is it also kind of gets a little bit old that the only time women can be warriors is in this kind of princess warrior, where like they don't just get to be soldiers and they don't get to win in other ways. And in this particular case, she wins more so by outsmarting her opponent and by using his own kind of tunnel vision against him than just by being, this super kind of once again sexualized warrior, right? So she is a warrior. She's very good at what she does. There are better around her, both who are presenting male and female. And it's the opportunity to someone show their heroism both by their strength and through their brain, which is nice. It has in a little bit of a kind of Batman-esque kind of a way. And please forgive me for that. But one of the things I like about Batman is the fact that when he, when he's fighting his villains, it's not just overpowering them. They're often not people he can overpower by virtue of their own innate superpowers, right? And so similarly in this case, there are characters who are like Helm, most notably, who seem like kind of super powered, and she lacks that, right? She's good at what she does. But okay, so I digress. What do I think it does particularly well in addressing an issue of feminism? Well, I think it really, really just kind of forces us to see and face and be reminded of the complete valuelessness of men. Now, forgive me when I say that. I'm not saying that men are actually valueless. I mean, to societies. That despite the fact that we are constantly kind of overvaluing men in terms of like, look at what this guy could do, and kind of the Superman trope. But what I mean is when you actually look at the math of a society, and we'll take this apart, what you realize is societies have, I think, over the course of many thousands of years, spent a whole lot of time trying to make men feel better about the fact that the society actually doesn't value them as much as it values women, for I think a fairly obvious reason, again, that we'll come back to. So what do I mean? So there's a lot of stuff that it does very smartly that I think we want to look at. And one of those things is this bridal gown issue at the end, which is very smart, right? So you have Hera putting on this bridal gown, and what's it supposed to represent and what's it supposed to mean? And well, it really is, I think at the end of the day, very, very, very simple, right? It's a way of distracting Wolf. Simple and done. But what's the depth there? Like what makes him so distracted, gets him to focus in a way where he's willing to throw aside everything else, like despite the fact that he's winning this war, right? And what she uses against him, that's the important thing here, is she uses against him something that he fundamentally cannot understand, a weakness of his psychology that I think has to do with a weakness of psychology that society needs to embed in men. Again, we'll return to that. What is this weakness? He can't imagine why she wouldn't want to marry him. That's it. That's really more so than anything else. And he has a lot of issues and a lot of things he wants vengeance for. But one of the things, like maybe the thing that gets him the most irate is just, why wouldn't you want to marry me? And he doesn't understand her, like, just not wanting to marry anyone, wanting to be a shield maiden, that's the thing that's motivated her in the same way, like, it's weird to me that we have difficulty with that because there's like all these dudes who are like, I want to be a priest. And we don't go, but you don't want to get married? What's wrong with you? Right? No, it's just like, oh, the person wants to be a priest. They want to devote their life to God, right? And well, in this particular case, she seems like someone who wants to devote herself to the sword and the shield, right? Which would mean, presumably, being a shield maiden, that she would not get married. And there's a whole lot to unpack there, which we may not necessarily have time for. But the point being is his response is, oh, you'd rather marry someone from Gondor? And she's like, no, I'm not something to be traded around. No one's talking to me about this and what I actually want to do. And it isn't kind of that overwhelmingly old, like, but she wants to marry with her own heart. She just doesn't want to do it. She just doesn't want to do it. No one can really see or understand that in terms of the men and the people in power and control in her life. And the reason why that I think is so important is it speaks to this vulnerability and this fear in the psychology that we've constructed of men of not being needed or wanted. That is one of the main thrusts of the film, is that it uses against the antagonist his inability to deal with the fact that it's okay for someone not to want you. That if you look at the world and expectations for men in our society now, that I think is a very real struggle, that men are really raised to believe, well, you're going to succeed, you're awesome, you need to achieve, you need to be at the very top, and people are going to want you. It's like that bikini-clad beer commercial. Women are going to want you. Pardon me. They're going to want to be around you. And that the idea of like, no, some women are just going to say, no, they don't want you. That's fine. Whatever, you move on with your life, is for many men just like this devastating, like, but what do I do? What do I do with that rejection? Well, it's all right. Not a big deal. You move on, right? Well, he can't handle it. He is like that, the hyperbole, the symbol, the personification of that male anxiety of rejection. Well, and it can't be that it just isn't good for her. She just doesn't want to marry anyone. She doesn't want men. It can't be in his mind that. It must be that he wants someone else. That again, in his upbringing, well, a woman needs a man, and she wants a man that can give her and things and provide for her and be her protector and her strength. He's protecting her since they're a child, right, from his father's wrath. Like she's going to need that, and she's going to want that. So why doesn't she want it from me? As opposed to the possibility she just doesn't want to be protected. She just doesn't need it. And you might go, well, yeah, but maybe she does need it. No, the point being is no one needs it if they genuinely don't want it. By the time they're an adult, you might be like, well, maybe they kind of do need that protection, but really, truly, it becomes like, well, no, I don't need it. And you're like, well, but you'll get robbed or mugged or murdered. And they're like, yeah, but I prefer my freedom. Okay, so what am I talking about with this psychology thing, right? Because some of you are probably going like, wait, is he saying that men have, oh, poor men, right? These poor guys, with all of their power and entitlement and privilege, like, oh, these poor dears. And some of you are like, probably going like, well, is he anti-man? What's going on? All that I'm looking at is there's this fascinating psychology behind the issue of warfare for men. Right? That there is this idea that men should fight in war, that women shouldn't. And where does that come from? And I think, and this is a philosophy all alongism more so than it is anything else, I think it comes from, if you look back, way back in the day, tribal societies what you see is a fascinating math problem. And the math problem is simply this. Let's say you have a tribal society of 100 people. Well, you would expect about 50% of them would be women and about 50% of them would be men. And say they go to war, right? And you have to decide, well, who you're going to send out into warfare. Now, we tend to think about it, well, you're going to send your biggest and your strongest and so on and so forth. I'm not convinced that that's always the case. Yeah, if you can, you'll send out your biggest warrior to fight their biggest warrior, and then it'll just be determined by those two warriors. Okay, that makes some sense. But let's also be honest. Warfare, especially when it becomes a matter of numbers and attrition, you send out your most expendable. And that's an unfortunate, tragic fact, right? That we send out the poor, we send out the people with the inability to dodge the draft without the money to get away from it, so on and so forth. So what is the most expendable group of people? Well, if you look again at a tribal society, well, you have a very simple math problem. If you have a society in which you send out your women into warfare, well, think about it. Say they get decimated by it, right? And you just have one woman comes back. So now you have the 50 men who have stayed at home, right? And the one woman who survived. Say they won, right? She's the one surviving victor, right? How do you rebuild your society, right? You got 50 men and one woman. Your entire society dies off, right? Just kind of the basic genetic math of that. On the other hand, you send out your men. One surviving victor comes back. You have the 50 women of your tribal society, and you have the one dude. You can rebuild your society. And I think that this is a math that people are aware of even back in the day. This isn't just a matter of like, oh, well, sperm is cheap and there's lots of it, and eggs there's very few of. Because in theory, like, people didn't know those kinds of specific cellular maths at the time, right? They're literally looking at things of like, how long does it take to have a baby? How many men can implant seed in women? And, they're just kind of looking at it in terms of like land and agriculture, weirdly and tragically enough. So what ends up happening, I think, is your society basically knows, like in its social psyche, right? In the back of its head, your society knows that the men are much more expendable. That you can lose most of the men in that war and still rebuild your society as long as you have most of the women in your society. So what do? Well, you tell the men, you're going out to do this because you're expendable? No, right? Like, how are they supposed to handle that, right? The psychology of that is too traumatized. They're like, oh, I'm probably going to go and die, and because no. So you have to start telling other stories that justify it. You start telling them, well, no, but you're the biggest and the strongest. You're the only one who can win. You're our protectors, right? You are the best ones to have this fight. And I don't think it's like just some sort of like secret evil manipulation. I think it's a matter of literally saying, as a society, the thing that people most need to hear. It becomes part of your social DNA. You are our fighters and you are our protectors. Because if you tell them that they're just expendable, it's going to be heartbreaking. And what if the development of warfare and the development of society along it have been embedded and structured around that delusion, right? That idea that men's egos need to be stoked so that they will happily walk off to warfare, not because they believe that they're expendable, but because they believe they're special. Okay, so that's the end of part one of this conversation. I want to bring it back to how this connects then with War of the Rohirrim, tie it together in a nice bow. If you've liked this, please like and comment. If you disagree, there's stuff I always miss, pop it in there. I love to respond. Thank you so much, and I'll see you for the second part soon.